All right, well, thank you all so much for coming tonight to our panel discussion. My name is Kate Myers-Emery, and I'm the manager of digital engagement at the George Eastman Museum. We're very excited for tonight's panel discussion with artists Sharon Harper, Nick Marshall, Penelope Umbrico, and Byron Wolfe. Before we begin, the museum would like to thank NEH CARES for providing support for this program, as well as many of the other virtual programs that we've offered this past year. We'd also like to thank the Corning Foundation for their sponsorship of this panel and the previous panel. And we want to thank our members and donors for their continued support during these challenging times. It's great to see some of our members logging in today. We really couldn't do everything that we do without your continued support. If you're not already a member or donor, we invite you to become one and be part of the Eastman Museum family, and you get all the great behind the scenes webinars right now, and then hopefully tours in the future. So please consider becoming a member. Tonight's discussion is going to be moderated by Heather Shannon, who is an associate curator in the museum's Department of Photography. Heather is responsible for curating the current exhibition, Gathering Clouds, Photography from the 19th Century and Today, which is currently on view in our main galleries, and is the catalyst for bringing together this group of artists. Our previous panel, which took place last month, featured Alejandro Cartagena, Sean McFarlane, and Will Wilson. And if you'd like to view that, as well as many of our other past webinars, you can see it at eastman.org/videos. We invite all of our attendees to ask questions at any point throughout tonight's discussion. To do this, you'll just use the Q&A icon that's at the bottom of your screen. You can submit your question there, and then at the end of the conversation, we'll go through as many of them as we can get to. The chat function, which is the other icon at the bottom of your screen, is open. So if you have technical difficulties or you just want to say hi and let us know where you're Zooming from tonight, we'd love to hear from you. So again, questions for Heather and the artists, go in Q&A. Anything else, you can use the chat function. We are recording today's talk, so if you want to watch it again, or if you want to share it with friends and colleagues, the video will be uploaded to our YouTube page, and you'll receive a direct link to it within the next week. So thank you all again, and I'll turn it over to my colleague, Heather Shannon.
Thank you, Kate, and thank you everyone for joining us tonight. It's my great pleasure to have Sharon Harper, Nick Marshall, Penelope Umbrico, and Byron Wolfe here with us tonight. Each of them have works that feature in my exhibition. And as it happens, each of them has 2 works in the exhibition because as the curator, sometimes you don't have to choose. Sometimes you can have everything you want. Nick has 10 works, 10 individual works in the show. So I guess he wins the number challenge. So I just want everyone to know at the beginning of this talk that we are going to be toggling back and forth between 4 different PowerPoint presentations. So just bear with us as we do that. And I'm just going to say a few introductory words. It might be repetitive. If you tuned in last time, you might have heard this before. But I just want to introduce the exhibition to everyone, especially if you haven't had a chance to see it either at the museum or virtually online. And if you are from out of town and haven't seen the exhibition, we have a great virtual Matterport tour that you can take, and that is available on our website. So Gathering Clouds, photographs from the 19th century and today, actually sprang from my dissertation research. I researched a little known photographer named Adam Clark Vroman, who's, if you can see my pointer, whose work features here in the exhibition, who made cloudscapes in the desert of the Southwest between 1895 and 1904. And wanting to understand his cloud photographs and why he made them, why he was obsessed with them, I decided to turn to the photographic trade literature. So I read runs of journals published between 1895 and 1905, the years he was active. And what I realized is that clouds had become, by that point, by the end of the 19th century, a benchmark of what, excuse me, of what constituted a fine art photograph. Vroman, as it happens, was not using the darkroom tricks recommended for those photographers who had pretensions to create fine art photographs. He made his cloud photographs on a single negative. He captured the sky and the clouds on a single negative. So in photography's beginnings, clouds were very difficult to capture on a negative or on a collodion plate with the landscape. So to expose for the landscape, you had to overexpose the sky. In addition to that, the tonality of the sky and the clouds printed at the same tonal value. And then if you by chance could get a cloud on a single negative, you had to take it at a certain time of day and underexpose the plate. So you see here the landscape in the TO is very, very dark so that he could get the cloud and the landscape on a single negative. So by the end of the century, they used this method starting in the 1850s called combination printing, where you would expose one negative for the clouds and another for the landscape. And in the dark room, you would use both negatives to make a single photographic print. And this was called combination printing. And here are examples of photographs where the photographer used combination printing. So combination printing became the marker of a fine art photograph because it could demonstrate the plasticity of the medium. And what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is photographs or photography was thought to simply record nature. But if the photographer could intervene in the print, he could demonstrate that he used his imagination to make a composition, much like a painter. So here we have, just by way of noting, we had Mark Osterman, our historic process historian, and Nick Brandreth make a combination printing video. And there's an example of what a combination printing, the tools needed for combination printing, the negative of the landscape, the negative of the clouds, and then the final print, combining both. This was originally conceived as just a 19th century exhibition, but in talking with my colleagues, it seemed like this would be a great opportunity to bring the photography of clouds into the present. And I did that by way of Alfred Stieglitz, who first made a cloud. He was well known for his equivalents, which are small, intimate studies of clouds, which he made in the 1920s and 1930s. But he had his first brush with clouds in the mountains of Switzerland in the 1880s. And that is a projection from one of those early Stieglitz cloud photographs. So Alfred Stieglitz's equivalents, which you see on the movable walls here, are considered masterworks in the history of photography. They are abstractions, and rather than being pure representations of clouds, he intended them to represent his innermost psychological or emotional states. So his work was highly influenced by European modernist thought, but I also see it, given what we know, they're made directly. He directed his camera up at the sky and made a direct photograph. There's no darkroom manipulations according to him. I also saw this as a repudiation of the way 19th century practitioners and early 20th century practitioners made photographs and the purposes for which they made them. So Stieglitz is still influential. His work continues, his clouds photographs, his equivalents continue to inspire artists. So I put him at the center of the gallery that contains the contemporary work. And this is where we find, with the exception of Penelope's video work, which is on the title wall, this is where we find Nick, Byron, and Sharon's work. So here is an example here is Sharon's work, which is in the show. Here's Byron's Life of a Cloud. Sharon's incredible moonfall installation work. All of these photographs here are a single work of art. And my colleague, Emily Phoenix, did an amazing job of installing the work. And I think Sharon was very happy with the results. Again, here's Byron's Life of a Cloud and Sharon's, oh gosh, Star Scratches Moon. Can you unmute yourself? And
Moon Studies and Star Scratches.
Moon Studies and Star Scratches, which I hope she'll talk about. Nick Marshall's Screen Time next to Abe Morell's After Constable. There's another example of Nick's work. Penelope's video work. Penelope's cloud inversions, which you see here, which is on the wall next to the handwork, what we're conceiving as the handwork wall. So she drew these, and she'll talk hopefully a little bit, we'll talk about them later, next to Joshua Rashad McFadden's hand-drawn clouds. James Tyler's here in the middle. He painted on his inkjet prints, and here is Byron Wolfe's Phantom Skies Shifting Ground after Muybridge. And we saw this as handwork because he worked so hard to create a new cloudscape. So those are the works that are in the show by the artists who we've had here tonight, who we've invited here tonight. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Sharon Harper. I've asked each artist to talk for several minutes about how they came to photograph clouds, what clouds mean to them, and where the photography of clouds has subsequently led them. So Sharon.
Thank you so much, Heather. I will share my screen now. And while I am sharing, and hopefully it has come up, I just want to thank you, Heather, so much for curating this exhibition and for actually physically installing it, which is such a joy. And I'm so sorry that I won't be seeing the physical exhibition, but Kate did an amazing job with the virtual exhibition. I just want to thank everyone at the Eastman House for that. And then also for bringing together this panel. I want to thank Heather and Nick. I'm so happy to be talking with you and with Byron and Penelope. It's a real pleasure. So I have some thoughts about clouds, a few words about clouds. This piece is called Moonfall, is imagined by the off-duty ferryman Karen in flight over the River Styx. And it, to me, the word that drives this piece is transformation. I was interested in clouds in terms of transformation. I was thinking about transformation, how water as a substance in clouds can change from gas to water to liquid to ice. And I was also thinking about scientifically how energy can't be created or destroyed. So that like the clouds, it just cycles. I was making this piece in response to reading the Tibetan book of Living and Dying. This is a single piece from the installation. They are all photographs, black and white photographs made from airplane windows and then toned different colors with copper toner and blue toner. So another way that I think about transformation is in this piece, which is called 12 Hours from Winter to Spring. It was taken overnight from 12 hours from March 31st to April 1st on a flight from Fairbanks, Alaska to Boston. And I think of that trickster of April Fools and also the ways in which being in flight can transform and collapse time and space from within the space of 12 hours, move from one season to the next. It's kind of interested in the ways that we can do that. In the work that is in the exhibition, Moon Studies and Star Scratches, I was thinking a lot about the infinite and this idea of, I guess that goes against the idea that energy can never be created nor destroyed, or does it? I don't know. I was thinking of clouds as infinite. And in this series in particular, I was working with a single sheet of film in this image. On the course of 4 months, I photographed the moon waxing and waning, and the clouds here register during long exposures. I was thinking more about the moon measuring our monthly calendar and a human scale of time in combination with the clouds and the stars and this more cosmic sense of the infinite space and time, deep time. I imagine clouds in the same way in this series, which is called 1 Month Weather Permitting. I photographed every night the night sky over Banff, Canada, and anything that happened within the sky, any kind of accident, every sheet of film is used and recorded. So this cloud that appears in this image, I actually don't know what it is. It is a mystery. Perhaps it is a light leak, perhaps it was outside. I don't know, but it's a different kind of cloud. And then with these clouds, I was thinking about the ways that the horizon is the one thing that is the boundary of the sky when we look out in our daily life. And these series of diptychs were made over 3 weeks in Norway during the summer solstice, which is a time of white nights. So I was interested in unlocking the photographs from that horizon line. So I took a photograph of the sky and a photograph of the sea and bringing them back into relationship with each other without the intervention of that horizon. I was also interested in the limits of photography in terms of being able to capture movement and light. So I was photographing as the light was leaving the sky at around 11 p.m. And I did these diptychs every night for 3 weeks. And then I just want to end with a series that I've been working on from 2014 to 2016. I'm going to read very briefly something that that this is from a series called Some Observations on Movements of the Earth. And the word that I'm thinking about here is precariousness. And I'm thinking about how volcanoes can bring clouds and earth together into contact with each other. And I just want to read from 2 short paragraphs from an essay that accompanies this 6-year project. Kilauea, the Big Island. Months before we traveled to Hawaii, lava flows continuously from Kilauea toward the town of Pahoa, where we're planning to stay with my niece. The lava stops at the town transfer station, sparing the single road that connects the town to a highway that rings the island. During this period of eruption and uncertainty, November 2014 to January 2015, my niece saw her neighbors clean up their yards and paint their houses. Offerings were left, welcoming and showing deference to Pele, goddess of the fire and volcanoes. Lava flows are not diverted, even if they will cover the only road leading into and out of town. This acknowledgement of Pele, the acts of respect for her power, do not eliminate the tragedy of loss, but they do shift the conversation dramatically. There's a clear-eyed acknowledgement of the precariousness of surroundings. There's a reckoning with forces at work within the earth that are much larger than the need for resources. In May 2018, the lava is flowing again, preceded by an earthquake. It flows over subdivisions, causing 2,000 people to evacuate. There are many ways to think about this event and future events. There are so many people living lives closely intertwined with the land who understand reciprocity and interconnectedness and the nature of precariousness. They understand being beholden to powerful forces that shape the earth. If we listen, this is something that can be heard from the top of Mauna Kea, at the mouth of the Elwha, and in the exposed roots of the fallen ancient redwoods. Those are all sites that I've photographed for this series. This is a story I'm telling, one of call and response, one of reciprocity. It's embedded in the earth if we listen. So I've moved from clouds to earth, but I think that there's a way in which clouds embody spirit and that the land is an active agent as well. So I will pass it now to, I believe, Nick. Thank you.
Nick, you need to unmute yourself.
I should know that by now, right? Thanks everybody for joining us today. And thank you, Heather. I would say if we're talking overall photo count, I think Sharon has me beat in the exhibition, but I guess individual pieces, yes, maybe. So I hadn't been making work specifically about clouds with previous bodies of work, but I'd definitely been thinking about the sky and our attempts to replicate it through color and how that can relate to our memory of a place, which was the focus of my Escape series from 2013. The Escape series was comprised of a set of photographs that you see on the left wall here, and a group of paintings on the right wall that explore our desire to withdraw from everyday life into representations of nature. With the sea as their subject matter, the work points to our inaccurate or contradictory attempts at defining color, in particular for air and water, two ephemeral elements that are constantly shifting depending on time of day, season, pollution, atmospheric conditions, etc. The photographic works in this series center around found snapshots from family vacations at sea. These tactile objects that are often cut, punctured, folded, or fading are cast as objects of nostalgia, floating in chromatic pools sampled from either the sky or the water via the eyedropper tool in Photoshop. Where the color is sampled from can be difficult to pinpoint, as the hues in the air and the water often appear the same, particularly when you're talking about sampling from small pixels. Our ability to recall color is complicated by the chromogenic print's instability as hues shift over time. With the sky, clouds, and ocean now tinted a kind of purplish tone, I wonder if our memory of this moment changes with the object. Or with the absence of color, do we think of this moment in black and white with a scalloped edge? Ultimately, the photographs were examining the objectness, if that's a word, of snapshots and their ability to physically transform over time, and for the interpretation to transform along with them. The paintings in this series were also an exploration of seascapes and color, but instead of photographic language, the paintings were based on the language used to market consumer house paints. Each painting is comprised of two modular panels, the top referencing the sky and the bottom referencing the ocean. The paintings conjure up idyllic vistas that lack specificity, creating anonymous or imaginative horizons from our attempts to describe color. There are also impossible horizons, like seeing a sky in Utah over an ocean. And different paint manufacturers have different interpretations of what a sky in Utah looks like. In Utah Sky 2065-40 over Clearest Ocean Blue 2064-40, the colors are only one paint swatch off from each other, creating an almost imperceptible difference between sky and water. Now, this may be somewhat of a dramatic shift, but some of the ideas behind the Escapes work, or at least the idea of nature and how it's experienced through photographs and materials, started playing itself out through some of my recent projects. But now I've become more interested in how current technology is altering our experience of images and what that means for our memories of them. For a while, I'd been taking screenshots of the moment when a photograph is loading on Instagram, and you're caught in this suspension of anticipation and, I don't know, maybe frustration, depending on your Wi-Fi, as you're waiting to see what it is. This might only be a second or two, but I like that for this brief slice of time, the image was something other than what it was intended to be, and then it's gone. To me, in a lot of ways, that was often more interesting and beautiful than the actual photograph when it had kind of fully loaded. Since digital technologies are always borrowing the language, tools, and aesthetics of analog photography, like Instagram filters, Photoshop tools like Burn and Dodge, I started asking myself what elements or aesthetics of digital photography are unique to those images, and how could I reverse this and emulate these types of images through analog technologies? The photographs from my Future Nostalgia series are made entirely by analog means. They're gelatin silver prints that were shot on film and printed in the darkroom by throwing the enlarger out of focus. Then, using an embroidery hoop, I would contact print the circle in the center to mimic the digital aesthetic of waiting. There's an interesting parallel between time and process. For me, being in the darkroom can be meditative, and with the image caught in this perpetual state of loading, the analog print creates this almost Zen-like image that requires the viewer to accept that the image will never load, but to appreciate the process of waiting. That project transitioned into my clouds work with a similar approach of utilizing digital aesthetics through analog technologies. But with these, I wanted it to be less obvious by creating a photograph that felt like it existed across time. With a cell phone, I take photographs of clouds and then invert the image to make a negative and place the phone upside down on a sheet of light-sensitive paper, exposing it to the illuminated phone screen for several hours. The resulting photographs are an homage to Stieglitz's cloud photographs from Equivalence that Heather had mentioned earlier. And while both bodies of work utilize the abstraction of clouds as a democratic subject matter, Stieglitz's photographs were more about the present moment, modernism, and kind of looking to the future, whereas Screen Time references the material history of the medium, creating photographs that push back against time. The warm sepia tones were called 19th century albumen prints. The visible fissures transferred from the cracked phone screen were called glass plate negatives, and the outline of the phone screen recalls the practice of contact printing. Though many of these characteristics are reminders of the past, the aspect ratio of the phone and the repetition of its shattered screen are also reminders of the present, a time where we are more consumed with images than ever before, and photographs feel less fixed in time, like clouds. I chose clouds as my subject matter because they lack specificity. They're timeless, they are placeless. It's difficult to locate a constantly shifting form. A photograph of a cloud taken in Dubai could not be differentiated from a photograph of a cloud taken in Kansas City. The medium of photography gives us little help in this regard, unless there is access to metadata, which coincidentally is often stored in the cloud, servers of data that can be accessed from anywhere at any time. This reference familiarizes us with a form we know, the cloud, one that is nebulous and ever-changing, hovering and always with us. But cloud computing is designed to streamline our lives and not take up space within it. In a world that favors this immediacy and invisibility, clouds in real life slow us down. Their presence is grounding, their subtle movements constantly abstracting and creating new forms that are unpredictable. And now I would love to turn it over to Penelope.
Okay. Share screen. Okay. Well, first I want to thank Heather also because the work that I'm going to show, well, the work in the show is absolutely brand new for me, and I'm not sure well, I guess it would have become a body of work, but it's very encouraging to have an exhibition to put it in, to make it into a body of work. It's so new. In fact, it's really, I had to really think hard about how I was going to talk about it. And so I actually wrote everything down because 7 minutes for me is really challenging and I wanted to try to keep to it. So, okay, so you might be familiar with my work called Suns from Sunsets from Flickr. This is a Flickr page in which I took suns. This work was mostly about what was the most photographed subject, the ubiquity of shared images, the currency and exchange value of images, the idea of an image script, the idea of individuality or the individual and the collective in photographic practices. but recently it's become more interesting to me to think of this work as being about the screen, because what you're actually looking at when you're looking at an image like this is you're not looking at sunlight, you're looking at screen light. So a lot of my work now begins with these questions. Questions about like what it means to live in digital space, where sunlight is replaced by screen light, how screen light is affecting us, especially these days. So these are images of the sun on the screen, video recorded with an iPhone. And a lot of the work now looks at how the natural world is seen through the platforms of the web, different web platforms like the moon, seen on Flickr. I've redacted all the textual information here so that you just see the structure of the platform. The work that I made for the George Eastman Museum comes out of concerns around the screen. For instance, here, how light is reflected off the screen and different technologies of the screen, and how natural light is reflected off the screen, but the screen itself has a particular kind of light. So this is images of televisions for sale on Craigslist, where the signal is being emitted, but there's no information. And also how light is filtered through the electronics of the broken screen. Another thing I started to do was take screens apart, and with those screens actually print on them. So we have an image that is then printed on the screen. And then I also put some of these screens onto a flatbed scanner and scanned them as the sun was shining through them to create this kind of photogram, or a scan of a photogram, which these are, so these are actual inkjet prints of the results of these scans of these screens. And one of the things that I'm thinking about here is that there's a kind of like cognitive dissonance. I lost my place in my text here. There's a kind of cognitive dissonance in the idea of print image on a screen or screen image as a print. And especially when it comes to digitizing analog paper photographs, the cognitive dissonance there for me is that what you're seeing is actually projective light of the screen of something that is supposed to be reflective light. So when I discovered, this is another kind of segue into the work for the George Eastman Museum, or that's in the George Eastman Museum exhibition. When I discovered that the New York Public Library was digitizing their picture collection, I decided to make this body of work. So I went to the New York Public Library picture collection and got all their images of solar eclipses. The inherent aspect of the solar eclipse to me is that it's the negation of projective light, which is the sun, with the object that is dependent on this light for its own visibility, which is the moon. And so the solar eclipse became a kind of epitome for me of the relationship between the reflective and projective medium. I actually created this body of work at the New York Public Library on the photocopier there. And the photocopier actually itself is a kind of eclipser. I really love how, for instance, here, you can see my, the white paper with image gives you image and whiteness, but where there is no paper, you get this completely black, black space, black ink. So here's a bar of, like, this was the image that I was photocopying, but then there's this extra space here where the light just escapes. And so for me, it's a kind of inverted eclipser where the escaped light becomes black. Okay. So images of clouds seen on the screen add another kind of layer to this dissonance that I'm talking about. The idea of the cloud is a perfect analogy to me as to the idea of images on the web, because some people have already talked about this, but they're inherently fragmented, unassignable, unlocatable, decontextualized, and they're constantly changing, and they're both incredibly abstract. So here we have a screen, and I'm wondering, can screen light, the light that you're receiving now through this screen, can it be thought of equally correlative to the light of the sky filtered through clouds? The effects of both are that they both affect us, but they're both in the background. They're relegated to the periphery, and they're non-subjects. They're almost invisible. Like, you're not actually aware of the screen, you're just thinking white. So even so, they're really felt. You actually can feel the sort of coolness coming off of the screen. Subliminally, they become our mood, and they inform us in ways that we're often not aware of. Okay, so Sharon, I had no idea that those were from airplanes. I did this whole body of drawings of my photographs of clouds from the airplane. And this is just a Google search. It's such a trope in photography, really, on some level. And then the question is, what do you do with it? Your installation is so beautiful. I was thinking about the fact that when you're up in a plane, you're completely ungrounded. Your whole subjecthood is kind of in question. You're 36,000 feet above the ground. And the idea of actually capturing the cloud with a device like your smartphone is slightly absurd and strange, because your phone is something that's so tactile, you touch it, but the cloud is something you could never touch. And then, just thinking about clouds as pictured in photographs, it's the white opaque paper that represents the cloud in a photograph, and in a painting, it's white opaque paint that expresses and renders the cloud in the painting. So there's a kind of odd inversion there. Okay, so this is an image of the installation there. I followed the logics of this kind of inversion and took all the photographs that I had, many of the photographs I had taken, and I traced them with white. Since white is the most opaque medium, the white cancels out whatever I'm tracing over. So I traced over all the dark areas. And then I got rid of the photograph and printed these, the white, but actually what you're looking at is another kind of inversion, because the white is not being printed. What you're seeing, the white is paper, and the gray is being printed. So it's kind of an interesting, I don't know, trick or something. Okay, so then the other thing is the photographs of clouds on the screen. So you're seeing images of paper here, and you're seeing the light from the paper projecting out of the screen instead of the light of on the paper reflecting light from the ambient space. So I've been thinking about that a lot. And so these are a few of the files that were sent to me via file transfer that I used in the video. And what I was really particularly interested in was not only this kind of exchange of reflective to projective light as I'm looking at these on the screen, but also the flatness of the screen space, flattening the paper and air and screen all together. Like there's a kind of compression of those things. And in places, that compression, it makes this kind of completely indistinguishable pattern of, like it's impossible to know whether you're looking at actually cloud or paper decay or fingerprints or smudges. So here's a quick 1 minute, I think, section of the video, excerpt from the video. There's sound, so I'll just talk over it. But I feel like this is a new compressed cloud space in which all the decay of the paper, the fingerprints, the scratches, the dust, they all become part of the same cloud, and almost as though detritus is floating around in the sky. And the other thing that's kind of interesting about this video is that it would actually not be possible if clouds weren't so abstract. So, but the abstraction of the cloud is what actually makes it happen. I think that's it for the video. So I stopped sharing my screen. Did I stop sharing it? Yeah, okay.
Thank you, Penelope. Byron?
Thanks. Thank you, Heather. I want to say very quickly how excited I was when I learned that you were putting this show together, because as a photographer over the years, I've just had an affection for photographing the clouds. But the more that I did it, and the more that I saw clouds being represented in the history of photography, I started to think that clouds were rather serious, and they weren't just sort of something to dismiss easily. So I have two very different pieces in the show. One of them is kind of more of a personal nature, and I'm not going to talk about that one so much. I'm going to talk about work that relates to the gentleman that you see on your screen here. And that's this guy's name is, we know him as Edward Muybridge, but when he was born in England, his given name was Edward James Muggeridge. He's an unusual character, and I have to give you a little bit of background because his work with clouds, I think, is important. In 1850, he changed his name to Edward James Muggeridge. In 1860, he changed it again to Edward James Muybridge. In 1875, he changed it to Eduardo Santiago Muybridge. And then in 1876, he changed it back to Edward James Muggeridge. When he died, his tombstone was engraved with the improper spelling of his last name. So there was even a sixth version. But the particular version of Muybridge that I was interested in was the 1875 Eduardo Santiago Muybridge. The name Muybridge may sound familiar to you if you know the history of photography at all. He's most well known for photographs that he made of animals and humans in motion. So this gridded picture here shows a sequence of 12 images of a horse named Occident. And he was one of the first photographers who devised the technology and the chemistry to freeze something that was in rapid motion. This is all probably quite familiar with everyone watching this talk, but what you see right here is an animation from a zoetrope that's installed at University of California, Riverside. The word zoetrope comes from the Greek zoe, meaning life, and tropos, meaning turning. So this was a sort of turning disc that revealed something about life. Muybridge as a person, well, he was an odd character, and I could talk about him for several hours at length, but he was a photographer living and working in California. He was 40 years old and married to Flora Muybridge, who was 20 years old. So he was twice her age. He spent a lot of time out in the field making photographs throughout California and the West. And on one of his trips, he came back from California, and his wife, Flora, had given birth to their child. And Muybridge was under the impression that the child was not his, that he was fathered by somebody else, a socialite named Harry Larkins. And he tracked Harry Larkins down in Napa, California, and pulled out a gun in public and shot him, and muttered some words that many believe were along the lines of, "My name is Muybridge and I have a message for you from my wife." With a single shot, he killed Harry Larkins, and it was a crime to which he confessed. He was tried in a court of law, and he was acquitted for reasons of justifiable homicide. But in his trial, his photographs that he was making were introduced as evidence, and evidence that he was, it was one of the first cases of suggesting that someone might be insane, and if they're insane, then they shouldn't be guilty for the murder. The reason his photographs were submitted as evidence was because his pictures were so unusual, and he often put himself in harm's way to make the photographs that he made. And as one who has tracked down many of the photographs he's made, I can vouch for that to some degree. He often put himself in harm's way to make photographs. This is a picture, the square picture there is of Edward Muybridge himself. It's one of his photographs, and he's out on a ledge in Yosemite. This is part of a larger piece that I made with longtime and frequent collaborator Mark Klett. His Muybridge's picture is embedded into our picture that also includes a photograph by 20th century photographer Ansel Adams and another 19th century photographer, Carlton Watkins. Anyway, I show that to cite that Muybridge did do unusual things in making his photographs. But back to the murder, immediately after the acquittal, within 2 weeks, he boarded a steamship in the middle of the night so he could avoid the relentless scrutiny of the San Francisco press. And that steamship traveled down to Central America. And for about 18 months or so, Muybridge was on a steamship. That's the ship that you see here in the background. The steamship was called the Nicaragua. And he traveled from San Francisco to Panama City, to Guatemala City. And during the 18 months, he traveled to different ports and different sites, and he made photographs. And after he made the photographs, he returned back to California, and he produced a limited number of photographic albums. And those photographic albums ranged in, had a number of photographs in them that ranged in size from about 100 to a master volume of 254 photographs. And they were photographs that sort of depicted his travels and his time on the steamship and in these locations in Central America. And there were these, they're really strange. They're sort of part travelogue, they're part photographs that document a sort of new industrialism and a new economy in Central America. But they also have another interesting aspect to them. But the number of albums that he produced was really quite limited. And what people would do is they would order from a master list of photographs, and they would choose the number of pictures that they wanted. And so in the end, a limited number of albums were produced, something along the lines of 12, maybe 13. It's hard to sort of figure out. And these are all the locations and numbers of pictures that exist in those albums. So this is all sort of background. What was interesting to me was I knew some of the photographs, and the fact that it was a limited number of photographs to look at meant that I could sort of study the albums and study the pictures and make comparisons between what happened. So for example, this is a sort of classic image from his series. It's called La Libertad, Salvador. It's from El Salvador. I'll zoom in here and you can see that there's this lone figure standing on a pier. He's looking over the ocean there, and that ocean is kind of hazy because it's a long exposure and water was coming in and out. You can see some clouds up in the sky, and in the background you see some hills. In the bottom right-hand corner, you can see a torn negative. That's the emulsion coming off, and you see his name etched into the negative itself. This is from an album held at Stanford. This is the exact same image held at the Center for Creative Photography. And the difference between them might be subtle, so I'll show them to you side by side. In this version, which I call basic and deluxe versions of La Libertad, El Salvador, you can see that Muybridge was modifying the pictures. And Heather talked in the introduction about how combination printing was such a common 19th century practice. And that, of course, is what Muybridge was doing. He was, in the right-hand version, he's adding those clouds, and as part of the process, he added that sort of artificial horizon there, I think to sort of just smooth the transition for the sky. And so since there was a limited number of albums and a limited number of pictures, but they were distributed around the country, one of the things I was really interested in doing was going through and analyzing every version of a picture that he made and seeing what different iterations he made. So this is another picture in San Benito, Mexico. And if you look at it in different albums, you see different versions of it. So I titled this "A Single Journey with Multiple Outcomes," the same picture from different albums. I became really interested in trying to sort of divine the reasons for why he would use certain cloud pictures in certain scenes, and why would he make certain choices. Here's another one. This is an image of a church in Antigua, Guatemala. It's actually still standing. And a pair to it here is Santo Domingo, Panama, where he uses the exact same cloud negative for two completely different landscape pictures. And I really sort of enjoyed that kind of visual analysis. I became interested in this idea of perhaps trying to reverse engineer many of Muybridge's photographs and come up with a kind of collection of master images of clouds. Like, could I, find all the pieces of a part of cloud and combine it into a single thing? This is a piece I made called 15 Layered Pictures that share a common cloud. And so I took the one cloud negative that appeared throughout as many pictures as possible, and took that image and then basically just sort of overlaid other versions of the exact same cloud that appeared in other photographs. And in Photoshop, I eliminated parts of pictures that were dark and made them transparent, and just slowly built up and accumulated to try to create a master cloud negative of Muybridge's work. It ends up being this sort of weird, sort of semi-apocalyptic cloud picture, which has symbols of all the different things that he photographed throughout Central America. Of course, the reference to Muybridge's motion studies was sort of too much to ignore. And so I made this piece called Atmospheric Locomotion, the exact same clouds through 2 countries and multiple scenes, all from a single album. It's impossible to tell looking at your computer screen, but I can assure you that every single picture there uses the exact same cloud negative in every single picture. I suppose this is one of the peculiarities of being an artist or specializing in anything, but I often found myself reflecting on how peculiar it is that I am so intimately familiar with these bizarre 19th century photographs that I can recognize a cloud picture by a little sort of curlicue up in the corner of a picture. It's a strange thing. This piece is titled The Relative Frequency of Muybridge's Repeating Clouds from the Large Stanford Album. So I created this sort of histogram that mapped out the frequency of a particular cloud to try to identify one of Muybridge's favorites. This cloud I called the brain cloud, and it's a cloud printed onto what Muybridge said was the crater of a volcano. And it was the very first Muybridge cloud picture that I saw, and it was just such an absurd, bizarre kind of combination print that I laughed when I saw it. And it was sort of the image that made me decide I needed to do something with these pictures. That cloud, the brain cloud, also appears in this combination print, which shows some volcanoes in Lake Atitlan in Guatemala, which was an interesting thing that I had to sort of track down and find and make photographs in response to. And ironically, the scene was completely obscured by trees, so I couldn't rephotograph it. And in order to make any kind of convincing comparative view, I had to use a Google Earth view, which showed the same scene. And not only did Muybridge add clouds to his photographs, but in this particular case, he added volcanoes to the scene. And the only way I could show it was this digital representation. that's a much younger version of me looking at the photograph where I was trying to find the volcano. And you can note the confusion on my face as I was trying to work out the fact that the volcanoes didn't exist. One of the big questions that I kept thinking about while I was doing all of this work is, why do the fake clouds matter? Why was Muybridge engaged in this enterprise to add clouds to these scenes? Of course, part of it was that he was overcoming technical limitations of the medium, but he was making very conscious decisions about what cloud to pair with what image. And to me, that was a really interesting question, because it reveals something about his expectations. It reveals something about our expectations at looking at photographs. What do we need to see when we're looking at pictures? And it would be easy enough to chalk this up to some sort of historical curiosity, like, oh, isn't that funny? That's what people in the 19th century did. But the fact is, there are software companies today, including Adobe, that have invested enormous amounts of money to develop software where skies and clouds can automatically be generated to replace some of our insufficient clouds and skies. And so whatever tendency existed in the 19th century still exists today. There's something that we want and expect from photographs and clouds that I think is interesting. I'm not even going to mention this, but these are snarky internet comments that people made in response to the software that I was just mentioning. I'll mention the center one. Here's a quote. "I've got a novel idea. How about learning how to capture a real beautiful scene? Not sour grapes, just so tired of people calling this photography. This is deceit and fakery packaged and marketed as imaging." And I just think that's really fascinating. So I'll just end on the last piece, which is in the show, and this is called "Phantom Skies and Shifting Ground" from Eduardo Santiago Muybridge's post-murder travels. And I'll leave it with that, and we can have whatever discussion we want to have.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. That was great. And actually, it's 7 o'clock. We overshot our time. So I think I'm just going to ask one question, and then we'll open it up. Or Nick, should I just open it up to audience questions? What do you think?
We have one question. So Heather,
Okay.
if you want to start on yours, and then we can.
Okay,
address
thanks,
that
Kate.
one.
Okay, to me, it seems that each of you has made photographs of clouds to think through or explore the nature of the medium of photography. What has the exploration taught you about photography, and how have clouds or the photography of clouds confirmed or transformed your understanding of the medium? And maybe we can start with Byron, since you just got done talking and you're warmed up.
Sure. It's an interesting question. I mean, I think, can you ask the question again?
Yeah, well, it's a long one.
Yeah.
So maybe I should ask an abridged version of the question. How has, it seems like you've used clouds to think through the nature of the medium. So what did you learn through this exploration, and how has the photography of clouds either confirmed or transformed your understanding of photography?
Well, I'll try to be really brief, but I think there are two ways that I could answer that question. One, through the historic examination of somebody like Muybridge and how he used clouds, and then another through my own inclinations as a photographer to make photographs of clouds, which I have done for a long time, and I didn't show or talk about any of that work. But when you often point your camera at something repeatedly over and over again, you have to ask the question: why am I doing this? Why do I like clouds so much? And so that's one question I think I could address. And then there's the question of Muybridge and the historical component. And I think I talked a little bit about the question of why do these fake clouds matter? I think the act of either photographing clouds or adding them to a scene reveals something about photography and what we expect from photography. this is a medium that's really good at recording the now and recording the ephemeral. And I think that that's partly what Muybridge was trying to infuse in the photographs, like that sense of this is a fleeting moment. And without that kind of reference to a thing that's going to be, that's going to change from moment to moment, the photograph itself sort of seems dead and static. I think for me, you know, my own impetus to photograph clouds is like the Stieglitz pictures, you can kind of invest anything you want into them. You know, it's that sense of gazing at the sky and gazing at clouds and imagining what they are. And just photographing them in and of itself is just sort of a pleasurable act. It kind of comes without a lot of baggage that pointing your camera at other things might come with.
Thank you. Penelope, do you want to give it a try?
Yeah, it's interesting, this idea of, well, the reverie that goes along with looking at clouds itself, like just how, and I think that has to do with the fact that they're inherently abstract, right? Like they're never of anything. They're just clouds. And so they can't be searched really unless somebody's known for clouds or whatever, and you can search those clouds like the Stieglitz clouds. But there's something about them for me that's, you know, I really enjoyed making both those bodies of work because I think that through the abstraction, through working with something that was so abstract, there was a looseness in my hand, like in my ability to make something and not be tied to the sort of indexicality that photography normally you know, is about. So for instance, the tracings, they didn't have to be exact, right? Like I tried to make them as exact as I could, but and then you know, but so they're based on the clouds, but they're indexical in that sense. But there was it sort of introduced a more sort of creative and almost serendipitous play with those works. And then with the video, as I said, I don't think it would have been possible to make this kind of space where you're not sure if it's moving or not. The cloud from one to the next changes and makes a new cloud, if there had been any kind of representation involved. You know, so they are representational of images of clouds, but the cloud itself, it could look like anything. So yeah, it's kind of an interesting medium.
Yeah.
Oh, and I'll just add to that I started to go along with the mark making. I started painting images of those George Eastman Museum collection clouds with white paint. So
Oh,
yeah, I started making a new series of paintings. So like,
great! I would love to see those when you're ready to share them with people.
from the screen.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. Sharon?
I gotta go back to the history of photography, because my favorite moment in the history of photography is when it was discovered. And that I always go back there because there were no rules whatsoever. And I think that one of the things, photography is so infinitely plastic, and I learned that from looking at the history of photography. And then this idea about clouds is likewise, it's infinite what you can do with them. I think it's as malleable as Penelope was saying, you know, as malleable as the medium itself. And I really think that so many times we understand the medium in a much more constrained way than the medium actually demands. And so I just love going back with both of those ideas to the beginning of history.
And Nick?
Yeah, I think kind of along the lines of what Penelope was talking about, the clouds for me was really about the kind of the abstraction of that clouds have inherently, led to me being able to make the work that I was making, or made it much easier, as I was I had been working with this process of the cell phone for a little bit and making prints, and I wasn't sure what my subject matter was going to be. And when a friend of mine, Sean McFarland, who's also in the exhibition, was visiting Rochester, we were looking at some of the Stieglitz, or he had Heather pull some of the Stieglitz equivalents. And so we were all in there looking at them, and as I'm looking at them, that like light bulb went off, and like seeing the scale of Stieglitz's prints, these contact prints, seeing the cloud as this kind of abstracted democratic subject matter, I was like, this is like the absolute perfect subject matter that transitions into this process. Because when you're making that contact print with a phone, like it's not a true contact print where you're getting like a negative sandwiched perfectly flat on the glass, where you're getting detail and sharpness. There's kind of, the image is separated. It's kind of hovering, behind the glass. So it softens and it kind of blurs a little bit, so that the object, like that process in itself already is abstracting the image. So clouds just kind of perfectly worked with that process of abstraction. And then there was something, I think that like the cracks in the glass too, I don't know, there was something about it. And I feel like the cracks in the glass, the screen, going back to kind of what Penelope was talking about with her moving image work, with the dust and the particles and the fingerprints and all of that stuff in the clouds, like all of those things kind of like intertwining, and to add this other extra layer of abstraction, which was very intriguing to me.
So because we have to close up, I wanted to actually give you all the opportunity to ask each other questions. Do you have questions for one another?
Oh my God, it was such a good presentation of your work. I mean, I don't know. I could listen to all of you all talk more. I don't have any questions though.
You
I guess
might not
Heather, I have
be
one for
able
you.
to get us to.
Oh, okay.
And it has to do, you referenced a group of photographs that you did your dissertation on.
Mhm.
And I'm kind of curious as to why do you think clouds matter in photography?
Well, I hope that the exhibition makes an argument for that. I actually think that the problematic of photographing clouds led to a lot of aesthetic and technological developments in the field. And then it then became something that was a theoretical problem as well. And so I think that's why clouds are so important. And I didn't really directly argue this like in my introductory panel, but it's what I hope it's one of the things I hope people take away from it, is like, oh, clouds actually have been and still are very important to our aesthetic sense and to technology, as your Photoshop thing suggested today.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, does that answer the question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks for having us, Heather.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you
so
for
much.
talking. I really enjoyed your presentations. There was one question for Byron. In your research, did you come across any criticism either from the photography community or the general public of Muybridge's cloud trickery?
Well, I kind of read that internet quote right at the very end, and that sort of referred more to contemporary stuff. I didn't come across any criticism of Muybridge, and in fact, he was a pretty good self-promoter, and he didn't promote his clouds so much, but he promoted another technique he had, which he called his moonlight effect, in which he would create a photograph that appeared to be a full moon, which was really just really darkly backlit clouds, and then something akin to a dime that he would stick on the piece of paper to make a cloud. I mean, it wasn't quite that crude, but it was sort of like that. But not directly. I didn't spot any criticism. I mean, I think in the 19th century, the technology or the chemistry or the process of photography was perhaps not as, quite as well known. And so this idea of building combination prints was perhaps a little bit more, I don't want to say subversive isn't the right word, but like the means in which the photographs were being made was probably not as widely understood by the public. Now everyone is skeptical looking at a photograph because they understand that it could be constructed. But no direct criticisms that I saw from the 19th century.
But I'd just like to add to that, but there was praise for his cloud photographs. So people did recognize that, there are a lot of blank clouds in the 19th century, blank skies, in photographs in the 19th century. And this wasn't necessarily desirable. It was a fact, but not desirable. But Muybridge's cloud photographs were highly praised by critics. So the opposite is true, not condemnation for trickery, but praise for the addition.
Mhm.
All right. So Kate, do you want to take us out?
Yeah, thank you all so much for coming and joining us for this fantastic conversation. Again, if you want to share this or listen again, we will be having it online and we will send it to everybody who attended tonight and was registered via email within the next week. So thank you, everyone who presented today, and we hope to see all of our attendees at our next talk. Thank you so much. Good night, everyone.
Thank you so much, everyone.
much.
Thank you.
Good
I
night.
love the work that's in my show. You guys are amazing.
Thank you, Heather.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.